Coming to you entirely pre-recorded from the Garage of Solitude here in Whitestone, Queens, I am Mario-Francisco Robles, and this is episode 12 of the Superman on Film podcast. Thank you for all who are joining me here today. I also want to thank everyone who's joined me these last 2 weeks where I've finally been able to say, coming to you live from the Garage of Solitude. Because yes, so far we are 2 weeks in to the return of Superman and Lois on the CW as that series prepares to unveil its entire final season for us as it's coming to a dramatic conclusion later on this year. And I've promised you all that 15 minutes after every new airing of a Superman and Lois episode, I'll be right here on the Superman on Film YouTube channel with a 30-minute reaction show. And we are 2 weeks into that, so thank you for everyone who's checked out those first 2 streams and the first people who've come and been a part of those streams and dropped in comments and questions. And I'm looking forward to bringing on some friends to be a part of these discussions in the weeks ahead. But for now, thank you to everyone who's come to those live broadcasts of the show. I actually do intend on migrating those 30-minute episodes here onto the proper Superman on Film podcast feed in audio form for those of you who still prefer to take the show in this way. So keep an eye out for that. There will be 2 bonus episodes dropping on the feed this week that are dedicated to these first 2 weeks of episodes for Superman and Lois. I also need to thank all of you who have helped make this show the #1 Superman podcast on Apple Podcasts for quite a while now. I tend to check every day or two just to see what my rankings are, and I'm always in the top 4. And for the last week plus, the Superman on Film podcast has been #1. Thanks to your searches, thanks to your listens and downloads, and thanks to your reviews. So I have a new review I'd like to read to all of you. As longtime listeners know that I always spotlight new reviews and read them on the show and give a big thank you shout out to the person who wrote it. So this week's new review goes to Clark1938. User Clark1938 on Apple Podcasts wrote, "You will believe a man can podcast. 5 stars. If you are obsessed with the Superman movies, you must listen to this. He brings so much insight to this. He is a sheer pleasure to listen to. Everything old is new again." Thank you, Clark1938. I appreciate that. And I happen to agree. If you love the old Superman movies and you love Superman in general, you should be following this show. And you should be telling your fellow Superman fans that you've got a great show for them to watch. All right? But you know what? Let's get into the usual things that we got to hit up on every week. So look, what is the current countdown situation for James Gunn's Superman? We are currently a little over 38 weeks away. That's right. Currently, as I record this, we are 268 days away from the arrival of James Gunn's Superman. That is 38 weeks of waiting for this. And listen, I can't wait to continue the countdown. And I also can't wait to give you this week's Superman on Film update, because there actually is one, right? It's been a few weeks of fairly quiet little things here and there. I've had to comment on a few interesting rumors that have made their way online. And I've shared a quote here or there, but there really hasn't been any news to report on this film in a little bit. And I'm very happy to report that as of yesterday, James Gunn has revealed that Krypto is confirmed. Krypto, we've heard rumors that he was going to be involved in the movie, Krypto the Superdog, but yesterday, James Gunn took to the Twitter, to the Threads, to the Instagram, to all of his social media threads with a post that went a little something like this. So I'm going to read you the post. I'm also going to show you the clip, if you're watching on YouTube, that he put along with this information. But here's what James Gunn posted yesterday. He said, "Krypto arrives on screens in Superman this summer. Krypto was inspired by our dog, Ozu, who we adopted shortly after I started writing Superman. Ozu, who came from a hoarding situation in a backyard with 60 other dogs and never knew human beings, was problematic to say the least. He immediately came in and destroyed our home, our shoes, our furniture. He even ate my laptop. It took a long time before he would let us touch him. I remember thinking, gosh, how difficult would life be if Ozu had superpowers? And thus, Crypto came into the script and changed the shape of the story as Ozu was changing my life. What better time to debut the not-so-good boy Crypto than Adopt a Shelter Dog Month? By the way, Ozu today is fairly often a very good boy. So I love that story, by the way, about how his dog, Ozu, is the inspiration for this. And I also love the imagery that he released with it. I'm about to put here on the screen the video that he put up with this announcement. You can see Clark and you could see Crypto sitting on the moon together, observing the Earth rotate in front of them. It's a shot that's right out of the comic books. The comic books actually already did this, and James included that image in his post. But here he is adapting this iconic comic book visual for the big screen to show us that Crypto, the super dog, is indeed going to be part of this new movie. Look, I got to tell you, I'm so overjoyed by this. This goes right into what I've been telling you all for months and months and months now, that this is going to be the most comic booky Superman movie we've ever gotten. That while many of the other films have adapted his story in a way that tries to make him a little cooler or totally overlooks and steers clear of some of the quote unquote cornier, cheesier parts of his mythology because they're self-conscious of the character, we're finally going to get a movie that's like, no, we're going to lean into all the different interesting things about this character's literary past, animated past, all the different things that make Superman special. And Crypto is one of them. And the fact that it has this personal connection for James, where he's connecting it to his experience with Ozu and how Ozu is changing his life. I can't wait to see how Crypto affects Superman's life. It makes me wonder if he's going to find Crypto as an adult, or will it be like in the comics where Crypto has been around since he was Superboy, since he was a teenager. You know, there's lots of different ways they could go with this. At first, I was even thinking they might totally, update his origin story rather than he's a dog from Krypton that was put into a rocket and sent here to be Cal's best friend along with, when Cal was sent over. I thought maybe they were going to do a thing where this was an Earth dog, a regular pup here from the planet Earth that Lex Luthor did some perhaps experiments on while he was trying to clone Superman and create evil Superman things. And that Clark was going to essentially adopt this pup that was an unwanted experiment, an unwanted failed experiment. But that was just a theory. And elsewhere already, James Gunn has gone out there and said, no, he is in fact an alien dog. And no, they're not going to turn him into the latest talking animal from James Gunn's movies, right? Some people thought, well, we had Rocket Raccoon who talked. We had King Shark who talked. We had Eagle. We had the Eagle-y from, what's his name? From Peacemaker. But Eagle-y didn't talk, by the way. So, I don't know why the assumption was that Crypto might talk. But no, he's also confirmed that no, Crypto is a dog. He barks. He will not be talking. So, James Gunn has already been out there having to debunk some of the theories and rumors circulating about this. But what's neat, too, is if you look at the imagery of Crypto that he's released so far, it's very clear to see that it's modeled off Ozu. With the pictures that we've seen of Ozu, with his sort of, scrappy hair and pointy ears, and he looks a little, he's not the most picturesque dog in the world, but he's adorable. You could tell that that's the design they're going for Crypto, and I'm all for it. I am all for it. And the other big Superman on film update for this week is just that DC Studios itself is coming to my hometown this weekend. That's right, New York Comic Con is happening this weekend, and James Gunn and company are going to be right here. I could go see them. They're going to be a few miles from my house. But unfortunately, I will not be able to go see them. As much as I wanted to try to attend this year's New York Comic Con for the panel that DC Studios was doing, unfortunately, they are going on Saturday at like 4:15 or 4:45, at which point I'll be in the middle of starting an event upstate at the time, so I will not be able to attend. So if I have any New York area fans, listeners, followers, viewers who plan on being there, please let me know how it goes. Slide into my DMs if anything incredible happens. Because for right now, all we know is that they're coming to promote Creature Commandos, and that there's going to be like a Creature Commandos fan activation interactive sort of situation going on to get people to know and start getting excited about these characters included in the Creature Commando. So that may very well be all that comes of New York Comic Con. We'll get more footage of that series. We'll meet the actors from that series, and we'll get hyped up for that series. That is likely all it's going to be. And yet, what are we all hoping for, right? We're all hoping for James Gunn does like a, oh, by the way, here's the trailer for Superman, because that's another sort of bit of the Superman on film update this week, though it's a little technical. So that's why I was almost not going to mention it, but there is in fact already a cut of the movie that's available. That's out there, not for us to watch. But if you're working on this movie, there's already an assembly cut, and it's actually been completed for some time. Because it's funny, earlier this week, someone reported as if it were news that there is an assembly cut already made for James Gunn's Superman. And when somebody asked him if that was true, he responded with, oh yeah, but that's been done for a while. Like he was acting like, yeah, that's not news. That the assembly cut was done a long time ago. So that's really exciting because, look, an assembly cut means that we have a full rough cut of the movie in terms of here are all the scenes in order. Here's all the story points are included. If you were to watch this assembly cut from start to finish, you will have seen everything that's going to be in the movie. It just hasn't been refined yet. It hasn't had all the effects work done. It hasn't had all the scoring done. It hasn't been color graded. It hasn't, it still needs to get trimmed down and refined, and they're going to find the movie within there. But the assembly cut already exists. So that means that, they could conceivably make some kind of a trailer, some kind of a teaser out of the footage that already exists, especially since it doesn't seem like he's going to do any reshoots. There were recent images of David Corenswet, the man playing Superman, with a buzz cut. All right. He shaved his head for something he's working on now. You don't do that if you think you're going to have to go back and film soon. So it looks like James Gunn's Superman will also not be requiring any reshoots, which he kind of gave us a heads up about a couple of months ago, saying, yeah, reshoots for me aren't really a thing because I tend to film with so much preparation in mind that by the time we film it, it's definitely going in the movie, and we don't really need to add anything or tweak anything because we're already 100% locked on this story. But either way, it looks like we're not getting reshoots. It looks like there's an assembly cut that's already out there getting worked on and refined down into our final movie. And look, do I think we're going to get a trailer this weekend? No. I think it's a little too soon. As exciting as that would be, I don't think it's happening this weekend. I do think that by the time this year is over, we will have seen it, though. Whether it's at the CCXP in Brazil, whether it's at attached to the Wicked movie. That's one of the rumors that, the Warner Brothers would love to get the trailer for this in front of Wicked, since Wicked is probably going to be like the big holiday movie this year. So to get Superman in front of those audiences, that would be clutch. So whether it's Wicked, whether it's CCXP, I have a very strong feeling that within 2 months' time, we're going to be sitting here talking about a teaser trailer and whether or not it got us hooked for this movie. So I'm very excited for that. But, I'm also quite excited for this week's topic, because similar to last week's topic, when I talked about Superman Returns, this one just feels like I'm talking about my life. This one just feels like I'm just going to open up about a whole chapter of my life to you, because chronicling the story of the Snyder Cut of Justice League was basically like my daily ritual for years and years and years. The chronicling the films that led up to it, chronicling the development time where we were wondering if it was ever going to see the light of day, and then finally getting to see the thing. It was years in the making, and it's a very unique story, something that we are unlikely to ever see again in Hollywood. This is it's a fascinating, unique story about a director who was wronged by a legendary studio, about fans who didn't want to believe it at first, and then were outraged when they realized what happened, and then fought for years and years and years to see this man's vision released. And then they actually got what they wanted, and it came out, and the movie was really good. I mean, it's a great story. It's a great story, and it's one that I've been looking forward to tackling here on the show. So let's do it. Let's do it. All right. So the brief history update that we have to get to, because, I always have to give a little history lesson before we get into the story. Your brief history lesson is this. Justice League was set to be the big event tentpole film that the DCEU was building towards for a few years. Because after 2013's Man of Steel, Warner Brothers and DC went full steam into trying to turn that film into the launch pad for an entire DC shared universe, which is something that Christopher Nolan, when he was attached to Man of Steel, wasn't too keen on. He was still in that mindset of, I like my heroes in an insular world where the only thing that matters is what's happening in the span of this story, this movie. I don't want to make an entire comic book landscape where there's all these heroes and there's all these villains and there's all this fantastical stuff, and you got to plant all these seeds for other things. Like, Christopher Nolan didn't want to touch that. That's why if you look at Man of Steel, there's very little world building in that. It really is its own insular story. But after Man of Steel, we know that Warner Brothers got up in there, just as Christopher Nolan said, bye. And they decided, now we're going to, we need to compete with Marvel. So from Man of Steel, we're going to go right into Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice, which is going to go right into Suicide Squad, right into Wonder Woman, get us to Justice League 1. Then that's going to bring us to The Flash and Aquaman, then Justice League 2. And then we're going to get a Batman solo movie and a Man of Steel 2 and a Justice League 3, like whatever it was. Like, they just started building out and building out and building out. And the person that they asked to help map out this big, ambitious future for them was Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio put together the core story for Batman versus Superman and Justice League 1 and 2. And from that core story came all the films that were going to work around it. So we were going to get BVS, and then Suicide Squad was going to continue the story of BVS. Steppenwolf was going to appear in Suicide Squad, which the entire movie takes place because it's a world where Superman has just died. There is no Justice League yet, and we need help from superpowered enemies. So Amanda Waller puts together a team of crazy people who could try to do the work of one Superman. So Suicide Squad was made as a reaction to BVS. And then we were going to get Wonder Woman, which takes place 100 years before the events of BVS, but would also help set up what's coming for Justice League by having a subplot with Bruce Wayne speaking to Diana and all this other stuff. But then what happened? Okay. BVS came out in March of 2016. But even by the time it came out, Warner Brothers had gone into full damage control mode. Because even though they had entrusted their DC universe to Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio, and they let him cast all the core members of the Justice League, they let him design all the core members of the Justice League, and they let him come up with the initial bullet points for each character's origin in this new DC extended universe, they got cold feet before the movie even came out. So before this March of 2016 release of BVS, they had already begun heavily rewriting the Justice League movie that was about to enter production in April. Okay, so they had already begun hastily rewriting Justice League and condensing it down from 2 films into 1. They also hijacked Suicide Squad, removed Steppenwolf from that story, changed the third act entirely, pumped millions more into the movie to film some more action scenes and scenes to lighten up the tone and make it funnier and lighter, since everyone hated how grim, dark, and joyless Batman vs. Superman had been. So Justice League getting rewritten, Suicide Squad getting totally kind of redone and reshot to kind of detach it from BVS a little bit. And then even Wonder Woman, Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman, took some creative liberties that also flat out contradict things that were said in BVS. And it seemed to really want to set itself apart from Zack Snyder's plans in a lot of ways. So Warner Brothers had already been visibly overhauling all of their DC plans that they had rushed into production to begin with. So when the movie was, on its way towards being released in 2017, something interesting started to happen, because little murmurs started to come out of their production that the overhaul that Warner Brothers was in the middle of was about to get even more intense than we had originally thought. And that brings us to May of 2017, when I warned all of you about what was going to happen to Justice League. Because even though it should have been clear to lots of people who were following for the last year leading up to this point, it should have been clear Warner Brothers was not on board with Snyder at all anymore. Us writers, us reporters, us people who podcast and write, us people in this sort of world, we're all talking amongst ourselves about the things we were hearing coming out of sources close to Warner Brothers. We were hearing that essentially Snyder is not even really directing this anymore, and that the film is not at all what it was originally going to be. And that the film itself is like making the film is becoming kind of a miserable situation for the studio and for the people involved, because the thing is being rewritten and worked on in live action. Like while they're making the movie, they're still making changes and updating scenes that have to get shot. And, it was a mess. It's not how you want arguably your most important blockbuster movie ever to be in its production span. You don't want this to be a movie that's now getting totally rethought, rethunk, reworked on mid-movie. This is just pure chaos. But then in May of 2017, myself and Kelvin Chavez over at the Splash Report received some very interesting information. And just for context here, Splash Report was the sequel. It was the spiritual brother to LatinoReview.com. That's where I started. That's the site where Kelvin Chavez and El Mayimbe, Humberto Gonzalez, and the marvelous Dave Gonzalez all got their starts breaking crazy stories. And Latino Review first got on the map because they broke the story of Brandon Routh being Superman in Superman Returns. So, Kelvin Chavez and the Splash Report lineage, we kind of had a history of breaking big stories before anyone else was ready to break them. And Splash Report was still in its infancy at the time, but we still had some sources. And all of a sudden, I get a call in May of 2017 that Justice League is about to go, it's about to undergo an extensive overhaul where it's about to be essentially remade for a second time. Because this source had seen the original plan, the plan that leading into April of 2016, what the film was going to be. Then this source saw the revised script of what it became between April and the fall of 2016 while they were filming the movie. And then this source found out about the new incoming changes that were now going to overhaul the film for a second time. And he couldn't believe that they were going to do all this with the movie coming out in 6 months. Okay, this is May. The movie comes out in November. The source could not believe this, so he contacted us. And this source had already proven himself. This source had already given us information about Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and how that film had been extensively reshot and overhauled by an outside director, Tony Gilroy, who came in and took over from Gareth Edwards when Lucasfilm said, "We're not happy with this rough cut of Rogue One. We wish you could keep all the action. That looks great, but we need to redo all the connective tissue scenes in between because this is missing a little bit of that Star Wars magic." And whatever it was, they just weren't happy. So this source had let us know about that. We reported on that, and all that eventually got confirmed. And now this same source was saying, hey, guess what? Now it's not Lucasfilm who's basically kicking a director out and changing the movie. Now it's Warner Brothers. And that's why on the date May 15th, 2017, I published a report, Upcoming Reshoots to Give Justice League a Second Major Facelift. I put that up on May the 15th, and right away, there was damage control. People started to deny it. Even our own friend, El Mayimbe, Humberto Gonzalez, he was now over at the Wrap, and he stooged himself out something awful to Warner Brothers. I guess he wanted to keep his access to the studio alive at the time. And he came out and debunked Kelvin and I. He came out and debunked the Splash Report story, saying that no, the movie has not been overhauled. There have not been any kind of reshoots yet, and the only reshoots that are coming are the kind of commonplace expected reshoots that all these movies kind of get. So really, there's nothing to see here. That was arguably one of the biggest large-scale debunkings. And then there were lots of other people who were like, God, these people don't even know how movies are made. You can't remake a movie 2 times in a span of months. How do you feel now, by the way, now that you know how that all worked out? I've always wanted to ask those people, oh, really? It can't be done, huh? Because they did it. And now you know they did it. But yes, so finally, I say finally, a full week goes by. And I guess maybe my story got a fire lit somewhere because Warner Brothers felt a need to do some official damage control. 1 week later, through The Hollywood Reporter, they went out and put an article that revealed that Zack Snyder was exiting the production entirely due to a family tragedy, and that Joss Whedon was coming on to direct new scenes that he had written, and that he was basically coming on to make sure that the film could make it to its November 17th release date, and that this was all only because of a personal tragedy that Zack Snyder had suffered where his daughter, Autumn Snyder, had committed suicide in March, and he therefore was not going to be able to find the time, the energy, and the passion to give this film everything that it needed. So that was the big story that came out 1 week after I warned you all that Justice League was about to be changed in a significant way. And this was also in this report is where it was the first time we got the big lie. This was the first time we got the big lie of the nature of Joss Whedon's involvement and let me just read it to you so you can see for yourself how the Hollywood Reporter attempted to pass off this story. So they said, Snyder, after screening a rough cut of Justice League for fellow filmmakers and friends, wanted to add additional scenes. So he brought Whedon on board to write them. But as he prepared to shoot the scenes in England, Snyder realized it was not time to leave home. The directing is minimal, and it has to adhere to the style and tone and the template that Zack set, says Toby Emmerich. We're not introducing any new characters. It's the same characters in some new scenes. He's handing the baton to Joss, but the course has really been set by Zack. I still believe that despite this tragedy, we'll still end up with a great movie. Whew, we're going to come back to this in a second, but I just want to once again repeat. The directing is minimal, and it has to adhere to the style and tone and the template that Zack set. The course has really been set by Zack. So look, they brought in Joss Whedon because he had made an Avengers movie, 2 Avengers movies that had done really well. Okay, they made a lot of money at the box office to the tune of billions, and the reviews were generally favorable for all of them. So Joss Whedon was the big headline. It was, big news that Joss Whedon, the Avengers guy, is coming over now to finish up and get the Justice League ready. And for fanboys and fangirls everywhere, that was interesting news because, going from the Avengers to the Justice League, that's almost like someone going from Star Trek to Star Wars, which, funny enough, that's what J.J. Abrams did, where it's like, how do you get to be the architect of both the Thing and its chief rival? So in this particular, J.J. Abrams did Star Trek and Star Wars, and Joss Whedon was like, fine, I'll do Avengers and Justice League. It was an interesting thing, and it was an interesting way to try to distract from the fact that behind the scenes, Snyder was essentially a lame duck director for a while now at that point. He had already been forced to shoot stuff that wasn't really his heart to shoot. He was forced to make changes to the movie that were really not the changes he wanted to make. It was, they used this tragedy, and that's the part that really I hate it. It's so sleazy, it's so gross, but they used the death of his daughter to try to explain some public relations changing to who's directing Justice League. To me, that's one of the grossest things in the world, where you're using the suicide of a real person. This director's daughter killed herself. And you're going to give me that information and go, but hey, here's Joss Whedon. Like, it's gross. And I know Snyder had to be on board with it. There's lots of quotes from him in this column where he's talking about how, I was going to try to push through it, but my family needs me and all this. But it's just, to me, he was just being a good soldier. He couldn't say the truth. He couldn't say, hey, guys, this movie was taken away from me. I'm grieving the loss of my daughter, and this studio will not stop telling me how I need to change this Justice League movie. And they brought in Joss Whedon to basically fix it. So I'm going to leave. He couldn't say that. So he had to go along with the big lie. And to me, that's where my feelings towards Snyder started to evolve a little bit, because I didn't really have much of a feeling for him one way or another personally. I knew I didn't care for his filmmaking style. I knew I wanted him far away from Superman. I knew that. But I didn't really care one way or another about Snyder the man. But as a father of 2 kids at that point, and as a creative artist myself, I put myself in his shoes. And when I saw that story, I was like, ooh, this is really kind of sleazy and gross of them to use a real life tragedy when they essentially just fired the guy, and they're using this as an excuse. And there's even more to it than that, because the article also makes it seem like it was Snyder's decision to decide that, no, we can't delay Justice League. Yeah, the report also said that the studio right away considered delaying the release of the film, but it was Snyder who said, no, we mustn't do that. I mean, what a ridiculous idea that would be. First of all, that a studio would even let a director decide when the movie comes out. You know what I mean? Like, with something of this nature, the studio decided these release dates a long time ago, and they're not going to move it because the director says he needs a little more time. It'd be nice if it worked that way. But no, it's ridiculous to think that that would happen. And it's ridiculous to think that Snyder would think, yes, please don't delay it. I want you to do extensive work with another director. Rush this out in the next 6 months and keep my name on it. Please don't delay this. Don't take your time with this and maybe try to make sure that we pull this off the way Lucasfilm pulled it off with Rogue One. No, don't take your time. Let's rush this. Yes, it was definitely a Snyder call. You know, they tried to not only use the tragedy as an explanation, but they even tried to hang the rushed release date of it all, the lack of a delay on him. And in a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about why they were really rushing it this far. But, the whole thing was just, it was just nasty. And the nastiness continued for months because Warner Brothers, even though they acknowledged that Whedon was coming in, since the official story was that he wasn't changing that much, and this was still just Zack's movie, they just kept lying to us for months and months, from September through November. Any kind of interview with a Warner Brothers executive or a member of the cast included some kind of a token lie about how Joss Whedon is basically not doing anything. Whedon he's a pleasure. He's just doing standard reshoots and pickups. This is still the same exact movie that Snyder's making. For months, we were fed this. And I was forced to be on defense the whole time, since I was the first reporter to attach my name to an article that said, hey, this Justice League movie is not the Justice League movie you think it's going to be. All his fans, they put a big bullseye on my chest. His fans came after me hard for months, acting like I made up the story that Justice League was being changed, and acting like I was just being a hater, that since I don't like Zack Snyder, therefore I'm just saying these mean things that the film is not going to be his movie anymore. It got personal. It got ridiculous. I saw them start attacking anyone who started speaking similar to me. I remember at some point, Robert Liefeld, the creator of Deadpool, put out a tweet somewhere in October saying that, I hear that they're testing Whedon's Justice League in Burbank tonight. And the amount of hate he got for calling it Whedon's Justice League. Meanwhile, it was Whedon's Justice League. You just didn't know it yet. Those of us who worked a little more behind, within the industry a little bit, which I was much more close to all that 7 years ago than I am now. Those of us who were, sort of behind the curtain, we already knew what was going on, and you all weren't going to find out for another month. But that didn't stop you all from coming after all of us who tried to warn you that this ain't Zack's movie anymore. It was a hairy time, and it wasn't made any better by the fact that, look, all the marketing was also Zack Snyder footage. Since he's the one who had completed principal photography, the film was essentially in the can. So they had all the shots they needed to try to make the trailers for this thing. So throughout the promotional campaign for the movie, all you really saw was Zack Snyder footage. So they were selling us Zack Snyder's Justice League. They were selling us that this is his movie, his vision, and this is the rightful continuation of Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. So therefore, since every trailer was very Snydery, it also made us look like liars. It also made any one of us who tried to say it's not Zack's movie look like we were full of it. So what happened? The movie finally comes out on November 17th, 2017. And right away, fans realized that I was right. Fans realized that this was not Zack Snyder's Justice League, that this was not the Snyder cut of the film at all. And the funny thing is, it wasn't like a ton of people realized it, because not a ton of people went to the movie. You know, it's one of the craziest things out of all of this, that it's insane that Warner Brothers thought they could pull off this insane facelift within 6 months of the film's release. But it's even more insane that people just didn't care anyway. That Warner Brothers had gone to such lengths. They brought back Henry Cavill with a mustache, and they spent $25 million removing a mustache for Joss Whedon's reshoots. They put so much time and effort into trying to redo this movie, and yet it opened to under $100 million. Okay, it got like 93 mil its opening weekend. It was a bomb. It was a disaster for a movie of this scale, where they had already spent close to $300 million on it. So, you know, when I say that people realized it on opening weekend, you know, it was the few people who actually cared enough to come out realized it. You know, because look, the sad and unfortunate truth is that the theatrical cut of Batman vs. Superman did irreparable harm to DC's reputation to fans around the world. And while they were happy to give Suicide Squad a shot because that looked like a more fun, interesting ensemble action comedy adventure with a unique premise, while they were happy to give Wonder Woman a shot because it was this interesting, inspirational, hopeful period piece from set during World War I. When it came to Justice League, which was set to directly continue BVS, people were like, I don't really want to see more of that part of the story. You know, and a year later, they came back strong for Aquaman. So it's like audiences showed, we like these DC characters, and we like some of what's been established here. We just don't like this particular plot line at all. That's why BVS suffered at the box office and Justice League arrived dead on arrival. And just like that, all the greed and all the mismanagement that had raced this film to arrive by November of 2017, it fully backfired in the faces of the executives who made these painstakingly stupid decisions. But you know what? It's important to note what was going on in the background of all this, and perhaps why the executives were in such a hurry to get this movie out before 2018. Because you see, in the background of all this, Time Warner Inc., the corporate owner of Warner Brothers Pictures, was amidst a merger. They were getting close to closing a deal wherein Time Inc. would become Warner Media. They were going to merge with AT&T. And a lot of the executives at the time at Warner Brothers, and the ones in particular who were watching over DC Entertainment at the time, they were trying to make sure they could cash out and get their big bonuses before 2018 hits, before the merger goes through, and before they likely get the axe from the incoming owners for having mismanaged everything so royally. I mean, in their best case scenario, if they pull this off and it was like a Rogue One situation where the audience was none the wiser, the movie was well received and made a ton of money, then those executives might have even gotten, you know, they would have gotten to keep their jobs. But instead, no one really got to keep their jobs after this, because the film executives responsible for all of this rushing were pretty quickly, rapidly tossed away from the situation. They were fired and they moved on to other posts at other studios, and in certain cases were never seen again. And when it came to the heads of DC Entertainment, Jeff Johns and John Berg, the people who had been brought on as part of the first overhaul of Justice League before Joss Whedon came in, those people were also shown the door, and they were made to wear the L on their way out. And Jeff Johns and everyone, you know, they were replaced by the end of by the end of 2017. Toby Emmerich had taken them off, and he was temporarily overseeing things. And then in January of 2018, That's when Walter Hamada was brought in as the new steward of DC Entertainment, and he was going to be the one who was going to be overseeing things, presumably when Warner Media went into effect, when this merger went into effect. But that power structure is important to note here. With the movie out and people realizing this was not really Zack's movie, and we've been hoodwinked, and somewhere there's a movie that more closely resembles what Snyder wanted to make, that's when we first started seeing the hashtag release the Snyder Cut. Right there in the winter of 2017, slowly but surely, the hashtag release the Snyder Cut campaign started to pick up steam as more and more fans realized, A, that wasn't the movie we were promised, and B, they used the death of his daughter to try to explain to us why things are different now. Like, people were rightfully outraged. And suddenly you started seeing this hashtag everywhere, and it got to the point where everyone was asking anyone involved with these movies, even reporters, hey, do you think we're going to see it? And the response was a hard no from all of us. You know, whether it was me saying, no, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's this current regime has no interest in releasing an alternate cut of Justice League. But you had other people flat out calling it a pipe dream. You had other people going, it's not a chance in hell. You're never going to see this movie. And it started becoming this question of like, well, does it exist? Is there this mythical Snyder Cut? And when I started seeing this question out there, it honestly confused me. I'm like, yeah, we know it exists. Why are people acting like it doesn't exist? If we go back to the quote from the Hollywood Reporter, where they announced his departure, it says very clearly, Snyder, after screening a rough cut of Justice League for fellow filmmakers and friends. So he had screened a cut of the movie. That is the Snyder Cut. That was the alternate version of the movie. So when, like, I'm telling you folks, if you weren't part of this online discourse, it was like insanity. For 2 years, I had to hear these debates over it exists, it doesn't exist, it exists, it doesn't exist. It got to the point where I used my website, revengeofthefans.com, to try and clarify the situation, because I would see the two different sides of this argument getting really mad at each other, but one side doesn't realize that when they're asking the other side the question of whether or not it exists, and the other side says, no, it doesn't, and it's not going to happen, what the other side is just saying is that, no, there isn't a releasable, ready-to-go version of the movie that has all of the effects, and has all the scoring, and is ready to be seen by the light of day. No, that does not exist. So I got Jay Oliva, Zack Snyder's storyboard artist, and I interviewed him for Revenge of the Fans, and I got him to talk about what the it that everyone's fighting for even is. And he said that basically it's a work in progress. It's like a working cut. It is an unfinished cut. And I'm like, see, if only everyone understood, if only the other side of this conversation understood that that's what really exists. All right. When people say this doesn't exist, all they're saying is that a version that is ready to be released doesn't exist. All right. But I was trying my best to just try to get everyone to at least have the same conversation. And it was just it was an upsetting time to be a fan, because everyone was so upset and hurt over what had happened. Even the people who weren't the biggest Snyder fans in the world were just upset that Justice League ended up being just a flop. You know, everyone was we had so much riding on these characters. We had so many hopes for how this was going to go. We saw how Marvel was running away with all this success on the other side of town. And so many of us were still just reeling that DC took its first swipe at a Justice League movie, and people essentially shrugged it off and turned it into memes. You know, it was just, you know, it was arguably the darkest time to be a fan of DC on film. And these debates, these little hashtag wars they went on throughout 2018. They went on and throughout all of 2019. And then finally we got into 2020. And here's where the interesting things start to take place with the changes in the ownership. Because while Walter Hamada was now the president of DC Films, and he was all too happy to just move on from the Justice League, move on from Zack Snyder's DCEU, and pivot into a whole new future for DC, the people at Warner Media suddenly saw an opportunity in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic, when all these productions had to be halted and paused and no new movies or series could really get produced because the world was basically shut down. All of a sudden, in May of 2020, we found out that the Snyder Cut was actually coming. But again, this wasn't from the original people who didn't want it not to come. This wasn't from Time Warner and Toby Emmerich and Jeff Johns and John Berg and the original people who never would have let this come out. This was now the executives at Warner Media, a brand new corporate entity that was Warner Brothers combined with AT&T, and they were really trying to get their streaming service, HBO Max, off the ground and to make it a competitor to Netflix. And they realized, hey, this Snyder Cut thing has been creating all this online buzz for over 2 years already. People have been clamoring for this alternate cut of Justice League. The footage does exist. Why don't we just get Zack to finish it and release it exclusively on our streaming platform, HBO Max? So they had a brilliant idea, and on May 20th, 2020, after over 2 years of fans begging for it and fans engaging in these maddening debates about whether it exists or not, we found out at last that Zack Snyder's Justice League is officially on the way. And it's crazy to think that the biggest things that we had to thank for that were A, the change in ownership, and B, the pandemic itself. Because with all of these streamers hurting for content, Max saw an opportunity. They're like, well, here's an action movie that we don't have to put out into production. It's already just sitting there. So if we can finish this and release it, it's almost like having a movie for free. You know, it made a lot of business sense at that time. But how much did it really cost? Right? Because remember, going back to the original debate of is there a releasable version of the movie or not, those of us who were telling you that there was not were proved correctly during this window of time. Because when Zack Snyder's Justice League finally did get its green light, we would eventually find out that it took $70 million to complete and to actually get the thing ready to be seen. So this once again just confirmed what most of us were telling you during the 2 weeks leading up to this, which was that the movie's going to require more funding, okay? This movie is not just sitting there ready for you to watch it. So they got their $70 million to finish the movie. The fans everywhere rejoiced. I remember when we finally saw a trailer for it, even I was excited. And I was someone who didn't really love Zack Snyder's vision for DC. But in the years since then, in the years between 2017 and 2020, when this film was announced, I had grown a bit of a fondness because I had watched Man of Steel a few times. I had a lot of super fans come over to me and say, no, you really need to give Man of Steel a shot, and you need to see the ultimate cut of Batman versus Superman. You know, there were things about Zack's vision that were very good and worth exploring. And I approached all his stuff with a more open mind, especially because at the time, DC on Film wasn't exactly lighting the world on fire. You know, after Aquaman made $1 billion in December of 2018, DC was still in this weird phantom zone limbo for a while, where Shazam hadn't really, struck gold. Birds of Prey didn't strike gold. Everything with DC had kind of stalled out. There wasn't like this new, exciting version of DC to sink my teeth into. So that gave me time to look at the version of DC that had just been discarded and to then retroactively gain an appreciation for it, ironically. So all of a sudden, after a couple of years of giving Man of Steel a real chance to win me over, and seeing the ultimate cut of BVS and thinking, that is the better cut of the movie. I can't believe the studio gimped it and put a worse version of this into theaters when it was so important to their future plans. So by the time we get here and they announce the movie's coming, my hype machine started to fire up. I was actually pretty darn excited, especially because I never liked the way they did it. While I, as a fan, did want Zack Snyder gone from the DC universe, I never in a million years thought they were going to use a personal tragedy to do it. I just thought that was hideous of them. So when I started hearing that actually things are thawing over there, things are changing, we might actually see it, I was like, good. All systems, let's see this alternate cut. And if it's going to Max, even better. It's not going to try to rewrite DC history. They're not going to put it into theaters as like, now this is our mainline DC continuity. No, they're going to release it on Max. And it's going to be special, almost like a collector's edition, director's cut of a movie. Something where this is for the super fans to watch and enjoy. And everyone else, you can move on. You could focus on the DC stuff that's currently happening. But for the hardcores who wanted to see what might have been, here it will be on Max. And as that, I thought this is a cool thing to support. Let's finally see what this movie would have been before Warner Brothers stuffed its head up its rear end, But then it was an interesting thing because they announced that it was coming out in March of 2021. And in December of 2020, only, 2 months before, we got an interesting report from the New York Times where in a profile on Walter Hamada and the difficulties in getting their DC IP back into mainstream glory, in this report from the New York Times, they refer to the film as a storytelling cul-de-sac, meaning it's not going to go anywhere. It's essentially a dead end, that this is not going to suddenly reopen any old pathways that the DCEU was going to have. This isn't going to reignite any of Snyder's original plans. This is literally just an alternate cut of the movie. Enjoy it for what it is, and then be fully prepared to move on. That was the big report that got a lot of controversy a couple of months before that. And it's funny because when the movie did come out, we found out that Zack Snyder, he'd been a naughty boy. Zack Snyder, the naughty boy, even though the film was supposed to be a film that went nowhere and didn't try to tease future stuff, he did ultimately find a way to sneak in teases for other things. He shot a scene with Martian Manhunter that was actually originally going to be between Bruce Wayne and the John Stewart Green Lantern, but he shot a scene with Martian Manhunter that implied some future things. And he also shot a whole new scene in the Nightmare timeline that shows Superman in the black suit as a villain again, trying to kill everyone because Lois is dead. And these things were not originally part of what Warner Brothers or Warner Media had okayed for him to do. They just wanted him to finish the film that was already shot and get it releasable. But Zack Snyder, the naughty boy, he still included some things, and he has a quote about this whole cul-de-sac thing. In a Vanity Fair piece that came out the day that the movie came out, he's initially, the filmmaker said, Warner Brothers resisted this edition. He's talking about the shot with Green Lantern. He said, they didn't want me to suggest more films to come. They wanted me to cul-de-sac it as much as I could. I'm like, look, that's just not the genre. It's not the comic book genre to end the story, regardless if we ever make another one or not. You know, Zach, I actually wholeheartedly disagree with you. I really felt that adding those teases to the movie and trying to, get people excited for plans that ain't coming, I think it was a disservice. And we'll get to this in a little bit because, this didn't end up going exactly the way the studio had hoped. And a part of me wonders if an original rumored plan might have been the better way to go. Because at some point before the film came out, there was talk of making it a 4-part miniseries, as opposed to just one long movie, just a 4-part miniseries. And I actually think that might have been the better way to do it. Because then if you make it 4 episodes, you get Max subscribers to tune in 4 different weeks in a row. And if you space it all out just right, you make sure that they have to subscribe for 2 months to see all 4 of these episodes, because you have it, these 4 you go across the pay period. But either way, there was this interesting theory of it being a mini series instead of a movie event. And in hindsight, maybe they should have done that. Because, look, the film finally arrived on Max on March 18th of 2021. And let me tell you first what I thought of it, and then we'll get into how it did, okay? When the movie came out, I saw it the day it came out, all right? I watched all 4 episodes, all 4 hours of Zack Snyder's epic on the day it came out. And my honest thoughts on the film were that it was the best thing Snyder had done. Okay, I had seen Dawn of the Dead. I had seen Watchmen. I had seen his previous DC films. I saw 300. To me, Zack Snyder's Justice League stands head and shoulders above everything else he's ever done. So I thought the movie was really good. I thought it handled the characters in a breathtakingly mythological, grandiose way. And I dug it for what it was. Again, I'm not looking at this story as if this is the mainline version of these characters that I have to be invested in for years to come, because they weren't really. But accepting it as just, this is this guy's vision for these characters, I thought his vision was pretty cool. And it's funny because it opened up weird questions for me where it's like, well, maybe they should have just left it all alone. Maybe they should have just let him do his Justice League movie, because this ended up being better and more gratifying than what they gave us. And meanwhile, they put so much work into making that and it didn't work out. So maybe they shouldn't have done all that extra work, and they should have just let this go the way it was, the way Snyder intended it to go. Because honestly, as a Superman fan, it was, it was the most Superman that Henry Cavill's Superman had seemed in any of Zack Snyder's movies. The reverence for the character, the way he was handled, the way Henry was able to act him out. It was like, there he is, finally. Finally, there is the Superman that Snyder had been promising us for years. So that's why, in all honesty, Zack Snyder's Justice League is A-okay in my book. And it's not just me. The reviews for that film were markedly higher than for anything else Zack Snyder had done related to DC. So by all accounts, for all intents and purposes, Zack Snyder's Justice League was an artistic triumph. But in terms of how it did with the numbers, that's a different story. Because, look, it performed admirably for an alternate cut of a movie. But if you compare it to other major films that were released on Max at the time, it didn't touch their numbers. Even if you go to Wonder Woman 84, which had come out 2 months prior during the holiday season, that got over 3 million views in its first 7 days. Yet, if you look at its DC brother in Zack Snyder's Justice League, that one got 2.2 million streams in its first 7 days. It also didn't touch the opening streams of Kong versus Godzilla, which got close to 3 million in its first 7 days. And then, what was the next DC release that got a Max premiere also? That would be The Suicide Squad, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. And that got 4 million streams in its first 10 days. So Zack Snyder's Justice League didn't surpass anything. It wasn't a record-breaking success. And on the contrary, instead of making his fans happy that now we finally got to see it, it just seemed to bring more hostility and anger towards the studio, because people were like, see, this was better. Why did you do all that? Can we please just continue this now? And even on my end, if you were watching the Fanboy podcast at the time, I remember saying, you know what? Since you've opened this door, why don't you just do more of these Snyderverse things, but make them Max exclusives? You know, do a Cyborg series or a Cyborg standalone movie with Ray Fisher and have it just be for Max. You know, make smaller budget spin-offs or whatever. Continue the Snyderverse on Max. I was all for it at the time, and there were lots of people going, it's very clear Snyder has more stories he wants to tell, so let's just do it. But the numbers just weren't there to back it up, and it wasn't the intention. The studio really did intend to move on. They wanted it to be a cul-de-sac. And guess what happened just a few months after this movie came out? Warner Media was the reason it existed. It was those new owners who took over from Time Warner, Warner Media. They're the reasons that we got Zack Snyder's Justice League. And yet, 2 months later, they decided we're out of here. Warner Media began its discussions to sell Warner Brothers and basically move out of the entertainment space entirely. So, these executives who were all gung-ho about Zack Snyder's Justice League were now on their way out within months, because I'm not saying it's because of Zack Snyder's Justice League. Of course not. But it was just, there was already another changing of the guard within months of the film coming out. So that meant that within a span of a few years, we went from Time Warner to Warner Media to what would become WBD, Warner Brothers Discovery. So the changing of the guard is just important to understand as we realize who was and who wasn't in charge of DC at the time that all these things happened. But by the time Warner Brothers Discovery took over, the Snyderverse was officially just a thing of the past. You know, Warner Brothers Discovery became official in April of 2022. So by that point, all this Snyder Cut stuff was a thing of the past, and they were already moving full scale ahead and trying to find a way forward for DC on film. And they were trying to find a Kevin Feige type figure who could take DC to unforeseen heights. And they eventually got James Gunn, and they got Peter Safran, and they formed DC Studios, and they took it away from Warner Brothers Pictures, and now it's its own standalone studio as part of the WBD umbrella of studios. And, the rest, hopefully, shall we say one day, the rest will be history when the eventual reboot kicks off in December and we finally get to see a brand new, fresh, from scratch take on these DC characters that we love so much. But before we wrap up, it's important to discuss what this film, Zack Snyder's Justice League, was and what it wasn't. Because to this day, there still seems to be a little confusion about this. See, the film, it's not the movie that would have gone into theaters on November 17th, 2017. The thing that we saw on Max, that 4-hour cut, that was just a special experience that Zack gave all of us who fought hard to try to get the movie out. Okay, that's all it really was. There was no way he was going to be putting that 4-hour cut into theaters. So that better reviewed version of the movie was not going to be the version that we saw in theaters anyway. It also was not, truthfully, 100% Zack Snyder's vision, because he never got to film the original script. Everything he shot was a compromised version of what he originally wanted to do. So Zack Snyder's Justice League, one of the reasons that it works so well is that it does incorporate notes and critiques against his previous works. And you could tell that he took those notes and he took those critiques and he made his strongest DC movie ever. So even though it says it's Zack Snyder's Justice League, it is still a bit of a collaboration, because he never got to film the 100% unadulterated Zack Snyder, Chris Terrio Justice League movie. He didn't. He didn't get a chance to do all that. But he shot a version that was somewhere between what he wanted and what Warner Brothers wanted before Whedon showed up. And that's what we got. We got this nice compromised version with extra scenes to pad out the story and an extra loving attention to detail, because now he was getting a chance to finish this project that had been taken away from him during a troubling time in his life. So that's what it was. It's a special redemption arc for Zack. You know, it's a special just gift to everyone who thought he was wronged and who felt he deserved to have his original vision shown. That's all it really is. It's a gift. It's a special, it's a feeling more than anything that we got to see it. And this alternate cut of the movie exists, and it's better than the warped, weird Frankenstein version that we got in 2017. And for those of us who wanted to see what this alternate take was, we got our alternate take. You know, it's just like, it's an emotional win, but it's not a doorway to more Snyderverse movies. It is not 100% a Zack Snyder joint. And ultimately, it was an interesting period for DC on film and a fascinating campaign to become a part of, to see, would this really happen? But now it's just part of DC's history. It's part of DC's past. And if you haven't seen it yet, I strongly suggest you check it out. It's still available on Max. It's 4 hours, but I'm telling you, it's his best work. It's his best work in this space. And I'm glad I got to finally talk to you about it. And I got to share a little bit of my arc of going from the guy who wanted him gone to the Paul Revere that Justice League was essentially taken away from him, to defending the fact that, listen, I'm just telling you that they took it away from him, to, all right, listen, I know you want to see this alternate cut of the movie, but they're not going to release that. They don't want you to know what they did to it. To, oh, wow, okay, the new owners want to release it? After the previous owners screwed Zack over? Yeah, count me in. I want to see that. To, I want to, the movie's here, and I really liked it. To finally, that was nice, and now it's behind us. And speaking of it being behind us, the word on the street was that the studio was actually ultimately regrettable about releasing Zack Snyder's Justice League. That's right. According to Variety, when all was said and done, they wished they hadn't done it. Because there was a report that came out sometime after ZSJL had come out, where Variety said privately, studio insiders have lamented that Zack Snyder's Justice League never should have happened. Rather than quiet the unceasing online campaigning to #release the Snyder Cut, the 4-hour HBO Max feature only further entrenched the vocal and extremely online Snyderverse base in opposition to the leadership at the studio in general and at DC in particular. See, so that's where, I break with a lot of the people who really love the film. While I was ready to move on and accept it for what it was afterward, instead, it just fed the people who wanted more and more of that. And that's something that to this day, James Gunn has to contend with. He has these fans who want what was promised in Zack Snyder's Justice League and are not ready to just turn the page for a reboot just yet. But you know what? Those fans who stuck with the project from the inception when it looked like it would never happen to when it finally did arrive, they did get their ultimate happy ending. And it is Zack Snyder's Justice League's happy ending at the end of the day, which was that at the Academy Awards telecast in the year 2022, they introduced a fan favorite moment. A moment where fans at home can vote using hashtags and whatever other digital means that the Academy deemed fit. And they could vote for their favorite moment in a movie, and the hashtag warriors came through. For that year, for the 2022 Academy Awards, the moment from the end of Zack Snyder's Justice League where the Flash uses the Time Force to reverse time and truly save the day in a moment that really was amazing to watch as a fan on that day when the movie came out. That was an amazing sequence. And that sequence won an Oscar. And poetically, that Oscar was voted upon by the same people who helped get that version of the movie released to begin with. The same people who made enough noise online that Warner Media said, hey, this is a worthwhile investment for us. Those same people got Zack Snyder an Academy Award, got this, that moment recognized on the international stage. So to me, that is the happiest of endings for Zack Snyder's Justice League. And that is the ending for episode 12 of the Superman on Film podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to like, rate, review, subscribe, share with a friend, and I'll be back next week with episode 13. Until then, life is chaos. Be kind. Up, up and away.